Welcome, everyone. This is still technically day 3 for me of interviews, but for you guys, it'll be day 4. And let's welcome to the stage another Detoxifying Masculinity member who has actually been to some of the meetings, Khalid.
Hey, everyone.
Khalid, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you are for those who do not know you?
Sure. Currently live in Brooklyn, particularly Prospect Leffers Garden. So if you're ever around the park, let me know. I'm always up for masking up and saying hi. And I am a software engineer at IBM. Been working there for about a year and a half now. But I'm not software engineering. I'm either playing video games, going to Detoxifying Masculinity meetings, or a variety of other things that I have interest in. But yeah, sort of the too long didn't read.
Are you interested at all in puns?
It really depends on the pun. I'm always interested in hearing them.
Okay, no, because I was just wondering if you were making a pun earlier when you were saying like, "Oh, is that for masking up and going to the park?"
Oh, so I'm glad you caught that, because there was a moment where I was like, "Is this the part where I make a pun out of this?" Because I didn't catch that when I originally thought of saying it, and I was like, "No, I'm not doing it. It's too easy. We're here."
And I think, I mean, the resolution is not 100%, but are those Magic the Gathering boxes behind you there?
Yes, I've slowly built my collection over the past couple of years. I really like those boxes in particular for organizing. However, the actual process of organizing hasn't begun yet, so we'll get there eventually, but yeah.
Yeah, because like you're not like the rest of us, because you have one of those jobs where you can sit at home and your employers still expect you to go into the office, the virtual office, every day.
Yeah, like I'm fortunate in that respect. So it sort of affords me a couple of like comforts like this.
But it also does mean that like while the rest of us are maybe doing projects that we've been putting off, you're like looking at those magic cards in the back like, would anybody really notice if I was missing?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that was last week, where I was like, oh yeah, I'm online, but I'm like in the kitchen baking. Honestly. It's like, yeah, I have like 4 pies I need to get to, and I guess I'm online.
Well, that was Thanksgiving. That was like, I think your fellow workers in their homes were probably also like, I have like 5,000 things I need to make, and it's just gonna be me and my roommate, or me and my very, very close friends, and no big gatherings this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're down to play Magic sometime in the park, I am down for it. I also have a box of Magic cards that I bought at a garage sale for $10. So they're probably not going to be anywhere near as good as yours, but I mean, how many of those that are back there are actually like banned? Because I know that's a huge thing in the current, like, or any card game, for those who might not be initiated. Whenever they come out with new decks, they're always sort of weighing older cards and how quote unquote strong they are compared to new cards, and they're always weeding out older ones, saying, we're not going to allow this one anymore.
Yeah.
Which is how they get your money. Be careful.
But yeah, Magic is sort of notorious for that. Though I've been very fortunate in that for the form of Magic I normally play, Commander, I don't think I have too many banned cards. Like, I think there's been one that's been banned as I've like played Magic. But oh no, I guess I have 2 banned cards. But most of them are just legal. But a lot of them are also just like, eventually, once the world opens up and I'm not afraid to be around kids anymore because they're giant germ spreaders. Love them though, love them to death. Was planning on donating some of like the lower power cards to like a school or something. And it's like, yeah, let the children like, play with these. They're pretty much worthless, so they can screw them up all they want, but
right.
Give them something to play around with.
Oh, that's very sweet. And I know Magic the Gathering recently went through a thing where they decided to get rid of certain cards because there were some race issues with them. And while that's not the discussion today, I was actually going to bring it over to what we're talking about in the umbrella of masculinity. And are there any cards that have ever been taken out or that you know of that might be problematic in the area of gender politics or gender philosophy?
This is actually a really great question, if only because there's one particular card that involves two characters in the game that I really like. One of the characters is Liliana. She's this necromancer, usually depicted as like this really sort of attractive woman that kind of like knows how to work people to get what she wants. Very powerful character in the game. She is currently fighting a way to get out of her demon contracts. In the game, there are these characters called planeswalkers, and basically they're allowed to go to like these different worlds, and they're pretty powerful and central characters to the overall plot of Magic, whatever plot you would consider. And Liliana, like I said, she was looking for a way to get out of her demon contracts, comes across this other planeswalker, Garrick, who's like this really big burly dude, born and raised in the wild. I don't think he was born in the wild actually, but he was basically raised in the wild. His hometown like killed his father or something, and a lot of other things. But the to London read is Liliana ends up killing one of Garrick's pets, and Garrick is really a nature guy, so this doesn't jive with him. And eventually, Liliana has this really powerful artifact that allows her to curse Garrick. This kind of drives Garrick mad. There's a now banned card art. I actually don't know if I'd be able to find it online anymore. For a pretty nice card, otherwise, where Garrick is like strangling Liliana, which they thought was like an okay thing to put on the card. You know, violence is sort of permitted on cards because they're like violent acts that happen in the world of Magic. But this was the particular way in which this one was shown. While the card wasn't banned, they just changed all of the official arts going forward, and I don't think they actually showed that art anymore because it was just sort of like a, outside looking in. If I'm not a man, or like the typical sort of nerd man, or if I'm someone that would probably sympathize or relate to or identify more with Liliana, that's not a very good look for a variety of reasons. So that's one of the cards that comes to mind. I think going forward, they've also tried to move away from more risque art. Like there's another card called Earthbind, I believe, where I don't know who commissioned it and what like the prompt was when they got the art, but it's just like, again, very risque art of like this, I think it's like this fairy character with sticky adhesive to the ground. There's barely any clothes involved, and I'm just like, I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, if I was thinking Earthbind, I think like sort of like maybe like Avatar: The Last Airbender, like you create shackles that sort of like go around the wrist and you're like stuck on the ground.
I think that's like closer to what the art is now, but then I don't really know like what the prompt was, but it was just like, this is very questionable for a game that's mainly marketed towards like younger men, but here we are.
Interesting. Okay. Well, with the game being marketed towards younger men, I guess the argument there that you are implying towards is that it's intended for a heterosexual, or to pull from my conversation with Jack that I just had before this, gynophilic point of view, where it's that gaze on these characters. It's like, oh, the men all have to be. Well, here's the thing. Well, let's get to that in a second. But all the women are going to be sort of slight, petite, good-looking, and put in these situations where it might be a little bit more than suggestive. And then on the other side, you have these men who are depicted as big and burly, as the one guy you mentioned, and maybe other things that represent a male strength and physical strength. And maybe that's meant for the guys to want to emulate, but also because I am a gay man and you are. Actually, we were going to talk about that. We were going to talk a little bit about queerness here, but you being queer, you might have a different way of looking at these men. And it's also interesting that it's that conversation of toys and things that are these men who are very hyper masculine, and they're supposed to be something to look up to, but then I'm kind of attracted to it.
I tried my best not to laugh throughout the question because it was just sort of jokes that I would throw out when in the recent set there was just like a couple of like different characters where I'm just like, okay, daddy, like that. And like because in Commander you choose like sort of a central character or two to be the representatives of your deck. And so like there was just like a couple of characters where like obviously it's sort of like the burly guy, and while that isn't necessarily sort of the type of person I go for, it was just like sort of a fun, like, you know, this is sort of definitely made to be more of like the attractive, like fantasy, strongman trope. On the other hand, I think it then becomes interesting looking at some of, I want to say probably pre-2012, 2013 characters, where like I felt like a lot of the physically stronger characters were usually the men in the game, with like women here or there, like sort of being depicted as strong or cunning enough to, you know, compete with the more burly men. But then I think later as the game progresses, we get our first non-binary, or transgender character, which I thought was pretty cool. I was gonna say one character was non-binary, but I actually don't know if they are. But like you see a lot of just like in general stronger women coming to the forefront, which I think is awesome. One, awesome, but two, it's like it's not like they don't exist. And like women with muscles and women that sort of, you know, I guess work out just as much as like the other men in the game sort of start to come into the forefront, which I think are pretty cool things.
Yeah.
But overall, it's, I don't know, it's just like an interesting sort of hobby where like sometimes like the men are attractive, or it's like, oh yeah, this is sort of a sexy character.
Was that something? Well, really quick, I did want to make an aside, and then I'll come back to my question. But the aside was because Wizards of the Coast, the company, owns both Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons, when it first started, if you chose to play a male or female character, determined certain stats for you. You actually would have a lower strength stat as a woman. So that was kind of baked into Dungeons and Dragons, and then a little bit into Wizards of the Coast as they originally came out. So just a little history note that they are. But I've discussed in a different podcast of this series with my friend Logan how some of that is changing. Now back to you. Were there other examples in your childhood or what have you where a queer eye was turned on to a certain form of media and you were able to connect to that media better through that lens?
I think in a sort of sense, like superheroes are probably like the other obvious one, with like, I'm trying to think. I want to say like X-Men were sort of like a big part of childhood, where I think when I was younger it was just like really cool seeing like all of the strong people, you know, sort of like fight back despite the fact that they were seen as like these others. And then like as I grew up, I'm like, this is a really interesting analogy. Though I will admit, like at first I thought of it mainly from like a racial point of view, but then really thought about the otherism sort of like being in that world. And as a lot of things are in our world, you know, once you become a little bit more well-read and sort of think about these things deeper, there's a lot of intersectionality that happens when it comes to issues of like race and gender and sexuality. And it's, I think, looking at superheroes in general, but also I think like the X-Men and like the mutants, it's like, oh yeah, like this is an interesting parallel for a lot of the identities that I carry. You know, being a black man in STEM, being a queer man in STEM, being a queer man in black spaces, a lot of those things, I feel like we really speak to sort of like the otherisms, and in some cases even, especially like being a black person in queer spaces, sort of like the superpowers that a lot of black queer people have for like a community.
Right, because I would say, and my view on it might be a little different than the average queer person, because I am someone who has always loved history in general. And when I first started coming out, I voraciously devoured queer history. And so I knew about like the Stonewall riots. I knew that it was the Black trans women who were the forerunners of our gay rights today, who, threw the first bricks at Stonewall. And I knew about the ball scene and how influential that is to gay culture, and that comes overwhelmingly from Black and Latin queer people. So I have a different, I viewed like the superpowers in a little bit in that way, of them and you in that legacy sort of being the forerunners of our culture.
And I think it, in like various ways, I think we start to see a lot of that like history crop up a little bit more. And it always, I think like whenever I see these things, whenever I learn more about the history, because I know like when I was first sort of discovering my own queerness, I was just kind of like, I need to figure this out first before I dive into any of this history, and like really just question myself as to what that meant for me. But like as I've been learning more history, I laughed a little bit when you said ballroom scenes. I remember I was on Tumblr one day. I remember seeing in particular a Vogue match between someone dressed as Sailor Moon and Wonder Woman. And so I was like, what are the chances that if I just type this into YouTube, I'll get an explanation as to what I just watched? And literally spent like, I think it was a 3-day weekend I had. I just spent all weekend watching Vogue videos. And I was like, wow, this entire scene makes a lot of sense now that I have words to associate with this.
So that means you have seen, I'm not butchering her name, I hope, Imani Dupree as Wonder Woman, with her Superman, where she drops from the ceiling into a split. Yes. And then eventually she is sitting on Superman's shoulders as he tap dances through her number.
Yes. And one, I was just shook for a second. I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that this is a thing. But two, I think again, sort of going back to this discussion of superpowers, that was like just something that I, never knew or never had the tools to like really verbalize its existence, but two, like then was like, wow, this is like really great. Like, what's the history of this? And then dug deeper. And I think like you see it a lot now, where now we're sort of bringing up that history. You have like on HBO Max. I'm going to be very mad because now I can't remember the ballroom show competition thing that they had. And
oh yeah.
This is gonna kill me.
I'm not a big HBO person, so I remember seeing ads for it, but I can't remember the name.
I'm gonna remember it. Watch when we're done. But and then you have things like Pose that are coming out and really sort of highlighting a lot of these things. Yeah, I think even though we sort of nowadays really glorify like these superheroes, I think with the important analogies to draw, and I really hope that once we finally get like the X-Men in the MCU, we see a little bit of this, is allowing people of any age really to make those parallels for themselves and really ask, like, we don't have mutants in real life that we know of, but in the way that they are in Marvel, but who are our real life mutants, or who are our real life people with those superpowers? And like in some ways, how are we not actually like giving them that credit, and how are we not being of service to them? I thought about that a lot actually today, when one of my friends sent me a post that sort of started once Elliot Page, which took me way too long to commit to memory, announced themselves as transgender. There was a post about, I want to get the language right, aesthetically masculine presenting folk not always being welcome in circles, whether they be queer circles, or in this case circles of like people of color, because it was a Black person speaking. Again, going back to just like a lot of the work that like our trans brothers and sisters have sort of like done for not only queer people, but within all of our lives, whether we realize it or not.
I hear the line, or I've heard the line before from people who are uncomfortable with trans individuals that they feel like they're lying. That, or like, well, in regards to your more aesthetically pleasing presentation, like, oh, I didn't know you didn't have a penis, or I didn't know you didn't have a vagina, you were lying to me. And I just find that so strange that like, up until that point you were attracted to this person, either to their mind or to their body otherwise, and for that to be the one thing that you're like, you're so upset about. For me, I describe myself as an androphile, so I'm attracted to the male form and male sexual organs. But if someone were to come to me and present themselves as male, and it turned out they did not have male sexual organs, I would be disappointed at most, but never angry. I think that's something that we have to... I think it's something that I actually have to sort of work on a little bit. Moving past the disappointment and just saying, oh, okay. And while I can never say that it won't happen, maybe it's something where I'm like, okay, that's actually something that does not interest me, but you are a lovely individual, and I would still like to get to know you maybe in other ways. Unless it was, of course, like a hookup, then that's its own rules.
Right.
But do you, have you ever encountered a similar situation where you've had to, maybe you've been in a room with someone who took issue with trans individuals, or have you yourself dealt with feelings that are difficult for you to process in regards to these individuals?
So I guess I'll speak on both. I think in sort of the learning how to just be a better person and realizing that someone figuring themselves out, and really not knowing the answer to a perpetual question that we face in life, and then not telling you that answer at that very moment, is not necessarily lying to you, I think. And I'd be very surprised to hear otherwise. Like, a lot of cis men like probably go through the phase where, depending, no matter how they are attracted to people, when they come across a trans person, there's probably sort of like on some scale, being disappointed, and then some, I think, take it a little bit far and being angry. And I think there was just like at one point where, I very ignorantly said like, oh yeah, I don't think I'd really date trans people, for sort of like similar reasons of like, at first I thought it was lying and maybe dishonesty involved. But as I grew older, as I read more, as I did the work, did my homework, and continue to do that, I think a lot of it is just sort of like, before then, like, I didn't even really understand my own queerness. So, and that's like it's definitely a part of my identity. So how could I expect anyone to really just have like answers about their gender when they may be questioning it? I think that's an unrealistic and unfair expectation, first and foremost.
Right. It's a kind of, and I think queer people especially deal with this better, because to come out is a journey of knowing yourself and then telling the world about yourself. Straight people don't have to come out. Straight people don't have to tell the world, I'm straight. The world already assumes you are, because you aren't in the majority here, and so they never have that process of self-discovery. So I think what you're getting at, and what I was trying to get to earlier poorly, but I never arrived at, was that when someone is confronted, particularly straight people, or maybe confronted with this trans identity, and they feel like this person is lying to them. What they're really upset about is maybe their own attraction and the confusing feelings that attraction is raising up for them. But because they've never really had to examine their attractions before, that's what's upsetting them.
Right. Because
it's this thing that's other than straight that is like, wait, am I not in this majority? And I feel like more people really are not in the majority than they think they are.
They're not. I think also in a world where we like to set defaults, precisely because setting defaults mean that you don't have to really do any work later on if flipping the switch doesn't really apply to you, so to speak. Having someone, present a certain way, but that way doesn't necessarily measure up to like what you're expecting the default to be, really requires you to do more work than you ever expected to, and around something sort of like is, I guess, I don't want to say primal, but like, something where like it comes to sort of sexual attraction, or I guess attraction of any kind, really. I feel like that's probably one of the last things people typically want to worry about. I think just having to do work on yourself is already such a hard thing, which is, why we like encourage people to go do therapy, so that it's not so difficult to be introspective and whatnot. But doing that work, I think, is just like a really difficult thing for people that I think queer people are very familiar with for a lot of reasons. As you hear lots of stories about like people hating themselves and really like grappling with the paradox that is like the default and what you should be compared to like what the reality actually is. And in a way, I would bet money that sort of the feelings from like especially cisgendered straight men, and would love to hear otherwise, so let me know, is that like sometimes it's almost like you're being dragged into doing that work whether you wanted to or not. And no one really likes being dragged into stuff, and that's sort of understandable. But...
I mean, look at the mask debate right now. And mask that you wear, not the masculinity, but current COVID times, blah blah blah.
Well, depending on who you ask, it might as well be the same thing. Remember, I'm not sure if you were on the call where like there was a tweet that one of us found where I think Tommy Lauren, is that the one very vile woman's name? I forgot.
There are several, but I don't commit their names to memory. They're not that important to me.
Yeah, I only remember it because of the tweet, because I like just started laughing at how stupid it was. Like Joe Biden had a picture of him wearing a mask, and so he was like, "Oh, you forgot this," and then gave him a purse, or like a picture of a purse, and I was just like, "There's a lot going on here." That, so masculinity and masking up during the pandemic, may go hand in hand, really.
Possibly. Time will tell. History will look back on this and. But really quickly, I wanted to ask if you could define your queerness for the audience. If you would like, if you feel comfortable putting a label on it, of course.
So I'm actually going to slightly steal your word in that, like, I think I also relate to sort of being more of an androphile, but still sort of exploring, mainly because, like, there have definitely been, I guess, if I said aesthetically masculine presenting earlier, aesthetically feminine presenting people that have also been like, oh yeah, I could definitely see being in a relationship with you as well. Like, and then there's also just the weird thing of like sort of almost being emotionally attracted to people, or like feeling like you can sort of have like those relationships.
Oh yeah.
And I think that gets into a whole spectrum of things, but
to confide with you and the audience a little bit, there is. Have you heard of the Kinsey scale?
Yes.
So for the audience members who don't know, the Kinsey scale, I can't remember his first name. I think it was Thomas. First name, last name is definitely Kinsey. And he was a psychologist exploring human sexuality. And he created this scale that goes from 1 to 6. And 1 is supposed to be the closest to heterosexual you can get, and 6 is supposed to be the closest to homosexual that you can get. He was only interested in these, and this was quite a while ago. A lot has changed since then. I think at one point he I think this is hearsay, but I believe that a 1 is actually not purely heterosexual, but that 6 is purely homosexual, which is interesting. Again, I don't know if that's in the study or if that's just something someone told me to fuck with me. But that would imply that everyone has this chance of shit happens. I'm straight, but shit happens. I think I'm like I told someone today I was like maybe a 5.5 on that scale, because every now and then I will look at a female presenting person and I will be attracted. And actually there is a woman that I know who is transgender, and it's that emotional and actually intellectual attraction that I have to this person. It's similar to a professor I had. I'm not going to say who, but there was a professor that I had, much older, much older. But they were just such an intelligent person, and I could just listen to them go on for hours, and I somewhat fantasized about them, but then I was like, and when I say older, I mean this person was like geriatric.
Got you.
And similar feelings towards this trans individual that I know who is a woman, and they're just smart as a whip, and I'm having those same sort of intellectual attractions to them, and it's interesting. I'm a little curious, but I'm not sure if I would be able to go the whole hog, to turn a phrase.
Right. I think, like, if we were to sort of reduce it to sort of the axis of the Kinsey scale, depends on the day. Like, some days feel like a 4.5, other days feel like a 5.5. But yeah, I think, like, for me, it's it goes a little bit beyond the physical a lot of times when it comes to more like thinking relationship and long-term things. Where, yeah, like, there's just a lot of other variables that sort of complicate it a little bit, but
of course,
androphiliac for the most part, sort of where I just like tell people to think.
It's kind of clinical, but I like that kind of clinicalness to it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to put all this in here. I wanted to sort of define your queerness and define my queerness, so that our audience members understand this is a disclaimer. Neither of us is trans, and we have been speaking a lot about trans people. We are speaking from people who are trying to understand the trans experience. We are by no means experts. Be kind. Rewind. So Khalid, we moving away from the trans into more heavily into the masculine aspects of our conversation here. Is there in your life, real or fictional, since we have brought in the worlds of fiction, who is a masculine presenting individual that you see as a sort of role model for yourself, for others, for everyone?
I remember telling my therapist last year that, like, role models weren't really my thing. But I think, you know, sort of thinking about it a little bit more, there are people and sort of characters that they're like aspects that I look up to. I guess this becomes an interesting point insofar as masculine presenting, if only because for some of them, I think because their masculinity and I guess identity as a whole is very secure in who they are, that like things like clothes sort of make it hard to define it that way at times. I think one person that, or one character in particular that I like, have you ever watched P-Valley on Showtime?
I've never even heard of this.
Well, yeah, so it's about, in particular, sort of the strip club scene in Atlanta. In particular, it focuses on this fiction, I believe it's fictional, pretty sure it is, strip club called The Pink. And Uncle Clifford, who is sort of the person who runs it, I think technically I'm not gonna say that because that's a spoiler. But Uncle Clifford.
Well, you can do spoiler alert, and then
Oh, okay.
so spoiler alert, everyone. If you haven't watched, what is the show again?
P-Valley.
And if you intend to, skip ahead like 30 seconds, a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, so he ends up like he owed a lot of money to the club, and after sort of like a lot of shenanigans happening, he ends up owning the club at the end, which is not the important part of the plot, but like a big thing that sort of gets answered whether they're going to save it. I think the interesting thing about Uncle Clifford is sort of, at least I didn't see anything about him in the show identifying as like a woman, but he definitely has a very like fluid way of dressing, I guess you would say, like very sort of like flashy nails. I think he does wear like a dress and heels at one time. I want to say heels are default, but I can't remember. I think there's also a scene where he kind of like actually does more of a suit, like he like takes off all the makeup and everything. But I think the reason why I really enjoyed this display of masculinity in itself is because like it's sort of the like assuredness of like who he is. So while it's not necessarily sort of like traditionally masculine as society or like a textbook would define it, he's displaying his masculinity in a way that like really works for him. And I think that that's sort of what I enjoy about that character, and I guess like about other people. Like if you look at and now I'm going to forget his actual name, Billy Porter.
Yes.
Oh, God,
Compose.
I was like, if I forgot Billy Porter's name, I'm just gonna sign off. Like, okay, we're done. But Billy Porter, I think, is another person that like I really look up to, mainly in just like the way that is sort of unapologetic, or he unapologetically expresses himself. And if you've ever seen any of the red carpet looks that you understand. My favorite being the hat that like has the shades on it so they close, and I need the hat. I might use that engineering degree I got and like rig a hat for myself. But...
I actually know a milliner, Matt Knife. He's a burlesque performer and that turned soap maker now during the pandemic, and he could probably make it for you.
Okay, we might need to talk. 'Cause I'm like, I just need to roll up to one of my meetings and just like, yeah, you're saying nonsense. I'm just bye.
Literal shade.
Well, people say I have like the shady eyes. Like I was well known for my side eye at one of my jobs, particularly because whenever I found that someone saying something completely ridiculous, I just had to look. Yeah, and they were just like, "Yeah, you did it all the time." And I was like, "Well, you guys should just stop saying bad things."
Do better.
Yeah, like that's all I'm asking.
It was interesting when you started to describe this character. Having never seen the show, I heard Uncle Clifford, immediately thought very heterosexual man, like maybe he was like down his luck and started going to a strip club to like feel better about himself, and then eventually he owns it. No, it was completely flipping of the script, and kind of a flamboyant character, would you say?
Yeah. And
maybe down his luck because of the way he chooses to present himself, because people are probably constantly questioning, like, are you a girl or are you a boy? Are you supposed to be a drag queen? You're not. And now that you're telling me about this, it's like, are you supposed to be a drag queen? You don't really look like you're a drag queen. Are you like getting ready for a performance? And this sort of questioning space. But he is comfortable within himself, I'm imagining.
Yeah, like or at least that's what I got from the show. And if anyone else watched, definitely hit me up. I'm totally wrong. I like missed something because I do down TV shows. But at least to me, it just felt like he was extremely secure, and I think that was also. I'm going to go into another spoiler, so skip into like another
spoiler. Skip 20, 30 seconds. Go.
So he ends up. There's this one rapper. I cannot say the name that he calls him in the show. There's this one rapper that he like gets involved with, and like he's very much questioning his sexuality, as like rapper in Atlanta, queerness, what? And Uncle Clifford, in comparison, is very like comfortable in understanding like who he is and like where his sexuality lies, whether no matter how like performant he is with like his clothes or his dresses or whatnot. So like that's a very interesting storyline that I can't wait to see what they do with it in season 2. I think that's also just like another thing that comes up because like, you know, people do question like the masculinity of a person, like when it comes to just being queer, non heterosexual, you know.
Yeah, have you ever seen any of like Eddie Izzard's specials? Do you know who Eddie Izzard is?
I am unfamiliar, unfortunately.
Eddie Izzard is. I'm unsure about the sexuality. I'm actually slightly unsure of the gender now. We are fluid. We contain multitudes. We grow in different directions. He started out, I believe, as a straight male cross-dresser who was also a comedian, and he would talk about not entirely the cross-dressing. He would bring it up from time to time. But his main focus in his shows is always like historical comedy. He is very intelligent, and it's just so interesting to see this person who you would look at and say, oh, what is this fucker going to talk about? Like, obviously he's going to talk about the dress he's wearing. No, let's talk about the Romans. Let's talk about language. Let's talk about the French and German. And it's just something you would not expect. And I was also reminded of what about this one? Maybe you get this reference. Do you watch
Yes. I'm sorry. One of my magic friends turned me on to that while I was baking, and I was just like, how did we not know this existed?
It was under my radar for a hell of a long time as well. But I watched I've been a fan of Willem's Beatdown for many years and watching that, and I kept getting these recommendations for this, and finally I think I had watched everything else on YouTube, and I said, okay, I'll give in to the algorithm, fine. Cut to like 12 hours later. But one of the things that one of the girls talks about, Trixie, is how makeup, it's just supposed to be fun.
Right.
It's not, and it was interesting. I actually have become such fans of theirs. I've started dipping into some of their other merchandise. I picked up their book. I've just started reading it, but in one of the first one or the second chapter, Trixie is writing about makeup, and she talks about how when she worked at the makeup counter, how many women would come in and just not know like what they're supposed to do with makeup. They felt intimidated by their makeup bag. Now, again, this is a discussion on masculinity, so let's bring it over to I'll let you all stew with that little tidbit and think about it in yourselves in your own daily conversations. But now think about men and makeup and how we have sort of rejected it for so long, yet it holds such a wonderful power to, and this is paraphrasing Trixie, talking about how makeup has the ability to transform you into the you that you believe you are.
Right.
You get to choose the color palette. You get to design the features and everything through these. Yes, there's somewhat illusions, but if you are making yourself, if you are actively taking part in this transformation process and the creation process of that is on your skin, isn't it all technically coming from you and you're just using tools, as we all do? Like a resume. Is a resume really you? Or is it a tool that you have created to try and get into this particular branch of the world?
Right.
Because, I mean, they always tell you not to create the same resume for different jobs. You're always going to tweak it to a little bit. So that's just like makeup. Go ahead.
Well, I think like in a similar way, you could almost argue that a lot of basic things that are more requirements for life, such as like maybe skincare or whatever, were almost not for men until they put a for men label on the skincare brand. Which is a question.
Oh my God! Yes.
And what's worse is that, especially like for my skin, all of like there was just one summer that I came back from college and I just like totally broke out because I was like, let's try this for men's soap. Nope, terrible idea. Just did not react well to it. It's way too harsh. And
But you bought it because you were thinking, oh, for men, it's for a guy, it's for me. When really, you go across the aisle to the women's stuff and you can see this huge selection that they have. You could probably find something there. And I don't know where you were at this time, but did you maybe go for the for men thing because you were nervous about going across the aisle?
Oh, certainly. I think that was definitely a decent part of it because it's like you see lavender and I'm like, yeah, I like how lavender smells. Or you see like all of these other like fruity smells, like, you know, literal fruity smells. And I'm just like, yeah, I like how pomegranates smell, or I like how peaches smell. Like all of those things smell wonderful. Why wouldn't I want to smell like a peach? But like there's just a weird stigma of, you know, picking a lot of those things because they're feminine. And I'm just like, but it's a fucking fruit. Like, you know, it smells great. Like, why? Like, do we not want to do that? Like, are we trying to be musty? Like, I'm confused at what the here. Because like I prefer not to be. And I think like it wasn't until sort of like I went to that dermatologist appointment and they were like, yeah, you should probably just use like regular Dove or something because like you have really sensitive skin. And I was just like, well, joke's on y'all. Now I get to use all this other stuff across the aisle. But it was just like sort of sad in a way that like it finally took that moment to just feel comfortable like getting something that, you know, was going to wash my body regardless.
Khalid, can we get a little nasty for a moment? And I do mean this as like it is something that is disgusting, or at least I find disgusting. Are you comfortable?
Okay, let's
okay. Maybe I'm not looking at this the right way, but again, I'm not the audience maybe for that. Anyway, have you ever heard of dick cheese?
Yes.
Okay, so it's interesting that we have dick cheese, but I've never really heard of an equivalent for women. However, as I was thinking about this question, I started to remember those. I've never seen the ads for it, but I remember seeing the parodies of the ads for those women who don't feel so fresh down there.
Right.
And it's always presented as, or if we took these side by side, it seems almost like it's okay for men to not keep themselves clean, but a woman to not keep herself clean. The horror, the absolute horror.
And, you know, especially coming from a background where, you know, before I played Magic, I used to play Yu-Gi-Oh, for example. I used to play it, like, competitively. That was a whole lifetime. But, I distinctly remember this one thing that really stopped me from going to tournaments for a while. We were in this, like, barnyard thing. And I remember taking my seat. It was definitely round 3 or 4. And I almost wanted to go throw up in the bathroom because the stench and body odor of everyone around me was just so bad. And like I brought extra deodorant because I know I was going to be there until like 11. I needed to do something because I didn't want to smell myself. And I was just like, is this a tactic? Like, is this how you get me to lose?
Well, considering you said you were playing Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm imagining these are the same people who go to Comic-Con. And audience members, if you have never been to Comic-Con, you cannot imagine some of the smells.
Yeah, I'm very at Comic-Con. I'm very much like also bring my extra deodorant, get in, get out, buy whatever I want to buy, get out, and like kind of just stay. And I also just really don't like crowds, which is very, very like paradoxical to going to a tournament or a Comic-Con, but I also like Comic-Con, so I'm like, you know, we're just gonna put on the big person pants and like run in, get what I want, and get out.
Do you belong to the NYC gamers group? And gamers spelled GAYMERS.
I do.
Or LGBTHQ.
I don't naturally. would love to learn more about it.
Because I think I was confusing the latter with the former, but LGBTHQ is specifically an organization that goes to Comic-Con and other cons around when we have them. Obviously not right now, but when we have them, and they host panels on queerness in those spaces and within pop culture. And I know one of the things they love to talk about, because a lot of their members are big into this, is cosplay. And they talk about sort of the gender politics of cosplay. Like, yes, it's okay for a man to dress as a woman. Yes, it's okay for a woman to dress as a man. But there is a certain level of respect that has to be given to that costuming. And if you're being true to the original character, that's one thing. But then there's like, if you're doing it for like sort of a fan service, like, anyway, I'm not part of that world, but I've heard some of the things they've talked about, and I just wondered if you had any thoughts or feelings on cosplay in particular.
I usually try and keep an open mind, and sort of, I think that's like one thing, almost going back to sort of the makeup point, where like people get to really like take time, get artsy, express themselves, devote or dedicate any amount of, you know, love for a character that they like. But I also think there is sort of like a decent level of respect that needs to go into it. Like, there are some creative things where people like meld characters, excuse me, and really get creative in presentation. There was one really funny one. We didn't have one this year, so last year, and
had to think there for a moment.
Yeah, I was like, we didn't go this year. We stayed home. But
they had virtual panels. I don't know if you attended any.
I couldn't do it. I was just like, this is not me. But yeah, I think there's definitely a boundary between like tasteful cosplay and like, you know, really just being free and expressing yourself, and not necessarily doing a character or like, you know, just sort of portraying a character and not a green light. And I don't think I've seen a lot of that in those spaces, or at least I haven't come across it because there's so many people dressed up there. Yeah, I definitely think there is sort of, you just have to be mindful about like the line.
Yeah, like with anything, you always have to say, like, can I get away? Not even can I get away with this? That's absolutely the wrong wording. But where am I comfortable going toward? What line am I comfortable going up to? And then is that line appropriate at this time? And for the people that I'm presenting to, and people who are going to see me just on the off chance, because you're like, a few years ago, I mean, you and I both remember a time before cameras being everywhere, and maybe you could get away with things a little bit more because you just weren't seen. But now it's like, you're going to be seen, and I think also there was that thought of in before, like I remember there being adverts like a child sees more than you think they do. So they're going to notice certain irregularities, or what like a parent might say about something, et cetera, et cetera. So there's always that. But now with there being the cameras, it's like you really kind of have to watch your step a little bit. It could feel a little bit Orwellian, 1984-ish, but it's also us as a society sort of realizing that, I don't know where you lie on this, but maybe our forms of government that we have that are supposed to protect us have not been doing maybe the best job, and maybe we have to sort of start self-policing. And that doesn't have to be with sticks and stones. That can totally be with debate and words, and just reminding someone gently, like, hey, you know, that might not be the best way you want to show women, especially if you ever plan to date a woman, have a daughter. Do you have a mother? Should we talk to her about what you're doing right now?
And I think, just in general, that style of feedback and discourse really just requires us to learn how to be a little bit more open to feedback, which, if you ever talk to an anti-masker, or an anti-vaxxer, those are two things that, or that's one thing.
Often go hand in hand, but they are technically separate.
Amazingly, that those things are really hard, I think, for people. It's like, yeah, perhaps you should be a little bit more thoughtful with your action. Is sort of, or what it always comes down to, really. I think the same is sort of true for cosplay, and like sort of what we as communities should definitely embrace doing more of, just like not being afraid to like give the constructive criticism and like maybe let them know, hey, this is something that I wanted to talk about, but also people being open to receiving that criticism or having those conversations, because they're hard but very useful.
Yes. Bit out of left field here with this question, but well, first I should preface with, are you religious at all?
That's an interesting question. I always
or maybe I should ask, were you brought up religiously?
Oh yeah, like brought up more like Southern Baptists.
Okay, so then this question definitely applies. So do you think with this sort of self-policing and the cameras being everywhere and all eyes always on you, do you think that's leading people to be more Christ-like? Because I think Christ, I'm not religious, but I definitely admire Christ as a figure, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, I was also brought up Southern Baptist, that Christ said to basically live by God's commandments, not just the 10, but all commandments, like even in private.
And I think that's sort of the key. And while, I guess there is some merit in not outwardly being a bigot every time you get a chance, there is sort of just the fundamental thing of why would someone have so much hate in their heart for a display of some identity that doesn't match what they're expecting. And so really going back to that, the defaults and the expectations associated with them. So like, if you're talking about a queer person, it's like, why is this person like wanting to be with someone of like the same gender, like a gender that you did not expect them to be with? Mm-hmm. One, why does that matter to you? Because it's none of your damn business. But two, like at the end of the day, it just really isn't. But mm-hmm. Two, why does that anger you so much? Why do you have so much hate for that person? With 2B, or like, the follow-up question to 2 being like, have you actually studied like the Bible that much that you are extremely comfortable understanding like the stories around like homosexuality and whatnot? Because like I've heard various interpretations from like religious scholars about like sort of what those scriptures mean and whatnot, but that's a whole different side almost.
Yeah, I was watching a YouTube video the other day that was, and exactly what you're talking about, like interpretation of the Bible, but also there are so many translations out there from these languages that have been, the civilizations haven't existed for millennia, and how are we supposed to exactly interpret these? And the most recent translation of the Bible came out in 2014. So who knows what that one is saying?
I'm pretty sure like textbooks get updated more than the Bible does, but and probably more peer reviewed. But that's neither here nor there. But
well, that was the Council of Trent, all of that good stuff, deciding, I could definitely continue this conversation. However, I do have to prepare for yet another interview today. So, Khalid, it has been wonderful getting to talk to you, getting to know you better outside of the group chats. So I would love to do this more one-on-one, play some Magic with you, if you'd be down for it.
Definitely. Like, I'm always down to play Magic and have Sex of varying levels. So.
Okay. Well, again, it has been a pleasure, and I will see you at the groups, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me, and I hope your weekend goes pretty great as well. I'll talk to you later.
Let's give a big round of applause to Khalid for being a guest here on Masks of Masculinity. When Khalid isn't casting spells or crafting software, you can find him on Instagram as @confections of a sugar daddy, where he shows off his baking skills. On the next episode, I'll be speaking with a gentleman whose kids call him Mom, my friend Luca Carroll. Until then, if you're man enough for you, you're man enough for us.